Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Defining the Modern Marketing Tech Stack. I'm your host, Kelsey Voss, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence in Seattle, and I'm joined by my colleague, Principal Analyst Dave Frankland in New York. Hi, Dave. Great to have you here.
Hey, Kelsey. Great to be here.
Before we get in to the main presentation, I'd like to thank Adobe for making today's webinar possible and welcome Adam Justice, Senior Director, Product Marketing at Adobe Experience Cloud. Adam is joining us from Utah. Hi, Adam.
Hello, Kelsey. Happy to join today.
Great. A few things before we dive in. We have a ton of information to share, but there's no need to take notes. We'll email you a link to view the slides and the full recording. But we do want you to participate. Just use the chat window on the right to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. So with that, Dave, let's get started. What's on the agenda for today?
Thanks, Kelsey. And as you mentioned, we are looking today at the Martech market. And really excited, just for the benefit of everyone listening, you're sort of getting three for the price of one today. Adam is obviously an Adobe, are big experts in this space, but Kelsey and I also just worked on two separate reports along with our forecasting team. So we have defined Martech as we are going to define it within Insider Intelligence, and we've worked on two separate reports. And I'll call on Kelsey a couple of times just to mention where we see differences between B2C and B2B. But specifically, what we're going to focus in on today is sort of, I guess, defining and then talking about the size of the market for Martech. And this is a US forecast that we have produced. We'll look at some of the factors affecting the growth of Martech, which is a little bit of a trailer to the result in that we do see this market growing. And then what does all this mean? What's the outlook for Martech buyers and users as we move forward in this industry? So let's kick off with that sort of definition. And it's probably not a big surprise if you've dialed in. You're probably fully aware that the marketing department is one of the largest spenders on technology in organizations. And marketers use technology for a variety of reasons: to better understand their customers, to manage those interactions they have with customers, to measure the impact of those interactions. And Martech has become a strategic investment for organizations, enabling companies of all shapes and sizes to sort of manage and build relationships with consumers. Yet, this is a vast and confusing market, a lot of different definitions. And as part of this research, we spoke to a whole bunch of different people, from some of the producers of Martech to many of the buyers of Martech and others in the industry that keep an eye. And so this is the definition that we settled on to define Martech. And that is, it's a range of software solutions that marketers use to plan, manage, execute, and measure their customer interactions. So relatively straightforward. And sort of part of what was important for us as we did this is what's not included. So we think of this as distinct from other tech solutions that may be deployed within the marketing department, but we're not thinking about it as MarTech specifically. So an obvious example here would be advertising technology or ad tech, but loyalty solutions, creative production tools, a whole host of things that marketers use that we didn't include in our definition of MarTech. So if I click down on what I just mentioned there a second ago, we see four main capabilities or components that we include in marketing. The first one I'm going to start on the bottom left here, being data and intelligence. This is, again, another topic where we've written and spoken a lot about the amount and challenges that marketers face in ingesting, integrating a vast array of data from a very, very broad range of sources in many different formats. And so, before we can think about doing anything that's relevant or personalized for consumers, that data has to be compiled into universal profiles. We can do analytic. Once we do that, we have a single, quote unquote, single view of the customer. We can do analytics to understand them, to predict what people might do, and to prescribe what sort of next best action we should take. And then do that on an ongoing basis once that's figured out. Sounds really easy, extremely complicated, as most of you probably know. But within there, we think of sort of the data management component of that, whether that's in a traditional data warehouse or a data lake or a more modern CDP or all of the above. At various analytics platforms making up or contributing to the Martech stack. And then sort of at the back end of this loop, if you like, is where measurement kicks in. If we move from bottom left to top left in content management, marketers are obviously creating a massive amount of creative and content assets. So whether that's images, videos, articles, brochures, you name it, brand documents, all of that has to be, we got to keep control of what we have, keep track of versions, ensure that we're using the right thing in the right place, consistent, accurate usage, using that in order to enable testing and segmentation, and then obviously distributing that to the right channel or point of interaction at the right time. And so, within there, digital asset management and content management solutions making up a vast component of that content management element. If we follow the ellipses here down to journey management in the bottom right, this is the long talked about but still relatively elusive right message to the right person at the right time. That's incredibly complex, and so marketers rely on campaign management and decision management solutions to enable that, to evaluate all of the available data, insights, potential decisions at that moment of interaction. What's the right message? What's the right offer? What's the right creative asset? And then compiling and delivering that, surfacing that in the right way to the right person at the right time. And so that's a really tough thing to do manually. In fact, I would go as far as say that it's impossible to do manually at any version of scale. And so that's where these solutions kick in. And then, if we continue up to the top right here, those interaction and engagement elements, customers really don't care about all that stuff that's going on behind the scenes in terms of what you're doing, how you're capturing and how you're integrating data, how you're worrying about all that content, how you're thinking about who should see what. They just want the right thing. They want relevant communication based on their needs, whether that's sort of information, whether that's entertainment, or if they're there we often think about the interaction as there's a purchase at the end, but obviously not every interaction is about a purchase, but sometimes it is. And so surfacing up that right content at the right time, we do that across obviously a whole slew of channels and interaction points, and so a whole bunch of technologies that enable that. Kelsey, since we worked on this together and we sort of had those major components consistent across B2C and B2B, there are some nuances. Do you want to just quickly touch on a few of the nuances that we found as we were going through this?
Correct. Yes, there are a few nuances between the components of B2B Martech versus B2C. For instance, the B2B model includes marketing automation such as Marketo and HubSpot, and account-based marketing under journey management. And within interaction and engagement, the B2B model includes activities such as events, which are more common in B2B.
Cool, thank you. And I'm gonna invite Kelsey a couple times as we go through here just to jump in. But in addition to defining Martech, we also, as I said, we worked with our forecasting team to size this market. I'm really excited to. This is our introduction of our inaugural, if I could say it, Martech forecast. So let's look at the combined B2C, B2B market, first of all, which we believe will hit $21.14 billion in 2022. Just again, as a reminder, this is US marketing technology spending. And you can see the dip here in growth rate. It's still a very healthy double-digit growth, but that bump in 2021 and that dip, if it's not obvious, was fueled by the pandemic, where we saw a rush to digital communication. So Martech spending took a really healthy bump. Like I say, the growth rate will slow down a little bit, but still very, very healthy growth. And through 2024, which is where the forecast extends to, when we expect to hit 27.11 billion. And if we just click down into the B2C standalone That growth rate lags ever so slightly behind B2B. We expect B2C to reach $14.54 billion this year. So that accounts for about a little more than 2/3 of the total US Martech spend. Again, the growth rate trails ever so slightly the more, the B2B market. But we do continue to see this really healthy growth and expect the B2C growth to hit 18.6 billion in that 2024 timeframe. And for anyone interested, we will have the B2C report going live this week. I believe it goes live on Thursday afternoon. And later in October, we'll be publishing the B2B forecast. So you can watch for those. If you are Pro subscribers, you'll probably get alerts, and they will be live on our Pro site in due course. So let's look at some of the factors that are affecting that growth. When we see growth across the board, we've seen over the years, we've seen several waves of innovation and consolidation throughout the market. The B2C landscape in particular is sort of dominated by a small number of sort of the broad suite providers. And then there's a very, very long tail of niche providers, some of which are sort of offering point solutions and even sort of almost features in some cases. Whereas what we think of as the big three in the B2C world of Adobe, Oracle, and Salesforce, all of whom have grown their capabilities considerably over the years. Both organically and through acquisition. And we believe they account for between 40 and 50% of B2C Martech spend this year. So what are the factors that are going to affect the spend? I'm going to go through this in sort of three sections. The first one being sort of innovation and capability expansion. Then we'll look at internal factors within organizations that are causing them to spend more, and then external factors that are directly affecting marketers. So let's look at the first of these, the sort of capability, focus, and experimentation. And first thing, I've mentioned it already. I'm sure we'll hear later on about it from Adam as well, is data and insights. And a whole confluence of circumstances has pushed data and more importantly, the insights that they drive to the core of marketing. We've been talking about marketing becoming more data-driven for years now. And it goes back to what I was describing in that ellipsis we were looking at in terms of consumers just want brands to recognize them, sort of know their interaction history, anticipate their needs, not have to feel like you're at Groundhog Day at every interaction that you have with a marketer. And yet, meanwhile, you sort of have privacy regulations and looming cookie deprecation and host of conversations we've all been having about proprietary identity graphs and the challenge of getting data from the so-called walled gardens, while dealing with the sort of speed and variety, especially of digital data, just makes this challenge of data management extremely difficult for marketers and has driven a lot of investment. There's been a lot of talk over the last several years about customer data platforms, or CDPs. It's not the only area of growth, but it's clearly, for those trying to do anything close to real-time interaction, it's one of the areas where we've seen a lot of investment. Another more recent, maybe not growing quite as fast, but a lot of interest is in the data clean rooms, where to enable some sort of blind matching of data, either with partners or with the walled garden websites. And so we're seeing a lot of experimentation and heat in the market in that area, and a lot of investment as a result. If we move on to the next element of capability and expansion, artificial intelligence has been around obviously for a long time. I think in the world of marketing, it's fair to say it's been sort of been used quite a bit for segmentation and analytics. But in the last 18 months or so, it's starting to really expand beyond that. We're seeing some really interesting work going on in the creative world, for example. So you've got sort of OpenAI's DALL-E 2 and other things that are starting to gain a lot of publicity and traction. Again, all of the big providers have been talking about their AI capabilities for quite a while, with some really cute names and icons and all the rest of it. But it is something that I think has been talked about more than done up until recently. And now we're seeing a lot of experimentation in that area, and as a result, a lot of investment. And then the notion of decisioning and decision management, with the increased emphasis on performance and ROI across marketing, that the value of making that right decision has never been higher. Just with the additional sort of computing power, as we say in here, and sort of analytics capabilities, it just creates that opportunity to invest more. And the cost of experimentation has come down. So the idea of being able to do A/B or even more advanced testing, and then expand on that, learn from that, and do something different next time as a result. Just that capability, things are moving and evolving at a faster pace than we've ever seen. But again, that is driving greater investment. It's not just set and forget. Companies have to actually invest in this on an ongoing basis, both money on spend as well as on internal resources. So next up, let's look at some of the internal factors that we found that are affecting spend. And the first thing I'll point out is sort of every conversation we have and every interview that we did, this notion of sort of an integrated solution and the importance of integration. Now, whether that's buying a sort of single integrated stack from one of the very large providers, or whether that's getting a series of niche capabilities and tying them together, the tying them together part of that is really, really important. And so again, sort of companies, even companies that are working with the large platforms, will often work with something on the edges. And so those integrated elements are super important. It jumps up to the top of the list, or near the top of the list for in every survey we see, as well as every conversation we have with marketers. You can see here the sort of integration capabilities. This is from a July study that Third Door did. It jumped from sort of a joint third in importance to most important this year. And it's something, as I say, in conversations and interviews we hear all the time. A few other things we hear from an internal point of view. What we've called here the changes in technology access. And what I mean by this is sort of the move. There's been an ongoing move from sort of the legacy on-prem internal solutions towards the more sort of software as a service SaaS solution. Most of which have pre-built connectors nowadays for integrating with other popular solutions. So again, that integration element is really important, but that access. Companies are sort of increasingly investing in headless solutions, looking at the sort of no-code opportunities to sort of tie things together through app marketplaces. So constant, again, experimentation and a little bit of the sort of democratization as well. We're seeing this pushing down deeper inside the organization, and not necessarily those decisions being made centrally when you get to some of the niche no-code opportunity. The next thing I'd highlight is sort of the integration with other enterprise solutions. So it's not just within marketing, it's other aspects of the enterprise suite. And, a lot of the folks we talk to, when they talk about breaking down silos inside their organization, they have found that sometimes technology can be the leading opportunity to do that. If we're working from a single source of customer data with customer care or product or other aspects of the business, that universal profile of the consumer or customer, if we know who someone is and we all have a similar sense of who that customer is, it gives the opportunity to get more aligned. And so we sort of see on the B2C side, we see the obvious places, sort of loyalty platforms, e-commerce platforms, but even ad tech and like I said, beyond into customer service. And Kelsey, do you want to jump in? I know you found some differences here on B2B as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the B2B side, CRM solutions are extremely important to integrate well with Martech to achieve marketing and sales goals, to convert leads and drive revenue and ensure marketing and sales are more aligned.
Cool, thank you. The last thing I'd mention in internal is obviously there's been a huge move. It's been going on for a few years, but the pandemic really, it just exploded out the digital transformation initiative within so many organizations, and that it, in some cases is being spearheaded by marketing, but in many cases, marketing is sort of being affected by everything going on inside the organization. We found a lot of companies that have moved to digital communication, but still need to sort of digitize how they do things inside the organization. And that's causing increased investment, again, on both sides of that ledger, sort of the digitization of interaction with customers, but also how do we become better at doing things digitally, whether that's as basic as an insertion order in the advertising world, you're moving away from the sort of back and forth through Excel and PDF to sort of more of that digital asset management and making sure that everything can be done in a streamlined way across the organization. So the next couple of things I wanted to highlight is sort of some of the external factors that are also impacting how marketers are thinking about their spend and what's driving some of that spend. Probably not a big surprise. The first one I'm going to mention here is regulation, where marketers have been forced to sort of take privacy seriously. It's taken us a long time, but it has finally happened. And the EU took the lead on this to some extent, but the US has been following. And I'd also just mention in here sort of the emphasis on data security, which again, sort of, I think is separate from privacy for sure, but often gets bundled together. But it is one of those areas where companies are finally starting to take it really seriously and invest in it as a result. It's no longer enough to sort of just send out an apology and a sort of free year of credit monitoring. It's something that regulators are coming down heavy on. I should have mentioned in here, I didn't even include it as a bullet, but the economy remains the big unknown, which is why it's not here. But it is something that a lot of the folks we're talking to are sort of thinking about how that's going to affect spend. And we did think about that. As we thought about the forecast, should we face a full-scale recession? What's that going to mean? Will marketing technology be one of the places that companies look to cut back? We don't think that Martech spending is going to be an area that certainly an existing spend, we don't think it will cut back. Will it soften on experimentation and unproven elements? Quite possibly. But from what we've seen in recent conversations and even as that in the spring when conversations around recession really started to heat up, just as many people who sort of talked about stepping back, as feels like as many people are thinking about doubling down, having seen the opportunity that arose as a result of the 2008 recession. Our colleague Jing-Chu Ren just published a report on the era of uncertainty and has quite a few elements in there for those of you that are subscribers. It'd be a great report to take a look at. The other external factor we did include as a bullet, wanted to highlight is sort of the consumer expectation, which is hard to quantify, but just sort of the idea that consumers expect more from their interactions with brands, and every interaction that a consumer has sort of raises their expectation for the next interaction, whether it's with that brand or another. We sort of don't care whether you compete directly with Amazon or Apple or USAA or whatever else. If we have a great experience with one brand, we sort of question why. I don't care that you're a cable company or a telecom company or whatever else. I expect that same level of interaction and sort of for marketers to keep up with consumers in order to deliver on that expectation. It requires that ongoing investment in customer understanding, in data management, analytics, as well as the sort of interaction solutions that we talked about at the start.
Hey, Dave, it's worth pointing out that this focus on the consumer-driven buyer has definitely influenced B2B marketing as well. In my recent report on the role of the B2B CMO, I talk about how B2B buyers prefer and expect a B2C buying experience with an autonomous self-serve buying process. And B2B CMOs really need to change their digital content strategies to include B2C marketing tactics in order to bring in quality leads.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely agree. Thank you. So let's pivot into sort of the outlook. What should marketers be thinking about? Where should you be looking to potentially double down as you think about all of these elements? And assuming that future growth is going to continue. Here are some of the things that we think are opportunity. I would say that the last few years has been an era of sort of, to some degree, of consolidation in the Martech space. The CDP landscape, the CDP space sort of exploded and has sort of, I think, settled. I think there was a lot of companies who claimed to be CDPs for a while that have now gone back to sort of their core competency, at least in admitting what they are. But there hasn't been any sort of complete breakthrough areas. And it's been that sort of, big focus on integration, on understanding the customer, managing the integration, as it should be. But here's what we think is going to sort of continue to affect the outlook. And the first thing we've talked about is sort of at every stage of in here, because it is that important, this whole element of data management and decisioning. And so what we as I just referenced, sort of that opportunity to sort of create that universal view of the customer, not just for marketing, but with other departments too. And that is a heavy lift. It's hard enough to do within marketing, but it is a great opportunity to sort of work with other peers and colleagues, align on how you view the customer, align on how you're going to measure the customer and measure the impact of activities. In order to do that, sort of, that allows you to think about the next best action, not just for a single channel or a single product, but to do that from a customer centric point of view and start to move into that more customer centric or customer obsessed way of doing things. The next thing I'd highlight is the real critical importance of thinking about the sort of human technology interaction. As we continue to invest in technology, as AI in particular becomes more and more central to what we do, thinking about the processes and skills is going to be really important for organizations to effectively embrace these new technologies. It's one thing to sort of sign the purchase orders, another thing to actually get the value from them. And so it really requires this sort of internal review, first of all, in terms of readiness to even embrace and introduce some of these things, what processes need to change. And that's across the board, right? So whether it can be anything from sort of workflows to content creation to thinking about interaction. Again, we've talked about this a little bit, but sort of thinking about the sort of interoperability of your ecosystem, thinking about what current platforms you have, assuming you are going to build on those, how well do they integrate with other platforms, talking to your vendors and providers about what pre-existing connectors may exist, what else they offer in an integrated way, and how well these things integrate with other enterprise elements of your technology capability. From a governance point of view, really important. Really important. And marketing takes a role in governance, and not just sort of hand this off to legal or compliance or others, but what we see is sort of these, as we said, sort of the firms that invest early. Just really important to stay on the right side, because this is a world, especially the regulatory side here globally, is changing quickly. Other elements like California introducing things on an ongoing basis that really do affect the rest of the US. So, important to keep an eye on any sort of rogue projects that are going on. Again, we talked about some of those no-code solutions that are occurring, but having a loose set of guidelines or governance structure that allows for some of that to occur, but doing it in a way that sort of protects the organization is really, really important. And then sort of just as you think about new opportunities, we would sort of say, look, it's early days for some of these applications like, blockchain and NFTs and the metaverse and these things. But now is the time to be thinking about them and potentially experimenting, certainly paying attention. I talked about data clean rooms already, thinking about the opportunities there if you're not already doing so. And if you're doing so in some areas, like using that to advertise on walled gardens, for example, thinking about this may also be an opportunity for us if it meets our privacy stipulations, it's an opportunity to partner with other partners and look at how we could learn even more about our customers, provide more relevance to them, et cetera. And so definitely an area where I think there's opportunity to explore in a very planful, careful way, but definitely something that we think everybody should be looking at this stage. So lots there to consider. I know we're going to hear more from Adam on this as well. And I'm going to hand it back to Kelsey. Look forward to hearing that discussion with Adam. And then I will join for a general Q&A and really, really looking forward to that discussion too. So Kelsey, back to you.
Great. That was really great, Dave. Thank you. Now, yes, let's bring on Adam Justice, Senior Director, Product Marketing at Adobe Experience Cloud. Welcome again, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelsey. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. So, Adam, most businesses need to be better at collecting and leveraging data. What are your recommendations for bringing in data from multiple sources and then using this data to enhance customer profiles in real time?
Yeah, Kelsey, kicking it off with a super relevant question. I appreciate the opportunity to address that. And I might say, even before getting into it, it's so affirming to listen to you and Dave sort of present this research. As a consumer of your research, I find it incredibly valuable. As a member of this team here at the Adobe Experience Cloud, I find it very affirming to see how correlated our product strategy and thinking is with some of the guidelines and some of the insights that you shared with us earlier. And definitely sort of in that space, and I love how you lead with data. So much of what we're trying to accomplish as marketers today begins with effective data collection and management. And I think that's been the case for a long time, but I think we're all getting smarter and the tools are getting better, right? So interestingly, in your question, I think right now, a lot of marketers are actually pretty good at collecting data. The challenge is actually being a little bit more editorial in the data that you truly need, like how identifying that signal-rich data in the context of what's actually going to lead us to be more effective at delivering a relevant and even personalized experience to not one customer, but all of our customers, no matter where they show up. So in order to do that, you absolutely need to get down to the business of not only collecting data, but collecting data that will give you context of when a customer presents themselves. And a lot of times that context is sort of maybe camouflaged across different systems or data types in your organization. So it's really critical to not only be able to get your hands on that behavioral data, that experience-oriented data that's happening in real time, maybe within your apps or your websites, but then also being able to kind of integrate dense data from, say, your CRM system. I think that there was a mention of that earlier, or point of sale, or kind of call centers, customer service. All of that ultimately is going to give you the best perspective on the customer. So the good news is that there are some pretty sophisticated tools out there to help you today, like the Adobe Experience Platform, to help you get to that point. I think you were calling it the universal profile. We call it a unified profile and go one step further and call it a real-time customer, a unified real-time customer profile, because it's not enough to sort of be able to ultimately bring that data together to create a synthesized view of your customer, but you need to know, what do they care about? How do they look right now? And how can we sort of bring to bear that sort of real-time data in order to affect the very next experience, or even like the experience that they're having right now? So I think that that's probably what I would suggest. Let's go from just being good data collectors to being really proficient in sort of identifying the right data and how to bring that data together in a way that gives us that singular and actionable view of the customer.
That is fantastic. And I'd love to take it one step further with integration. Sure. Earlier, Dave talked about integrating the Martech stack with other systems. Adobe's solution really extends to the Commerce Suite. What are best practices for companies when it comes to integrating marketing and commerce solutions?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I certainly think that in a way the answer resides in the question itself, and that is the notion of integration. It's not enough anymore to kind of have a sort of a bulletproof shopping cart, or being able to kind of contemplate the way that your shopping cart and your order fulfillment and all of those things belong together, because they certainly do. But if you're really looking at kind of how can we effectively treat our customer as an individual, how can we sort of unlock the mysteries of of lifetime value, and maybe how can we effectively present recommendations that we know that are going to expand the cart. It's really about integration. And by integration, we mean looking at the full scope of the customer experience. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, that moment where the decision is made to transact ends up kind of functioning as an island. But in order to most effectively allow someone to transact and kind of build an experience with your brand, you need to look at what happened before. And it's in, to kind of rewind, it's in that sort of unified customer profile where you want that information. You want to be able to capture and kind of appreciate their preferences, kind of where they've sort of indicated they're interested in what, and then bring that data. For example, we house that data in Adobe Experience Platform. How can we ensure that there's a healthy handshake between Adobe Commerce and the Adobe Experience Platform, so that ultimately, we're looking at the full scope, not just that point in time when someone raises their hand and says, I'm willing to buy, but kind of how can we maybe even help them get to that point? And also, Adobe talks about, let's make every moment personal and every experience shoppable. That's also, once you've more effectively sort of pursued those integrations, you can start to look at things like, where can we ensure that we have a transactable moment, whether it's in an email or it's truly like within, your storefront. Those types of integrations are truly expansive when you look at the opportunity to unlock and grow what your kind of e-commerce opportunity truly is.
Right. So yeah, let's talk about, so to be effective at integration and do everything you're saying, you really have to be efficient. So to increase efficiency, what do you recommend teams do to eliminate manual processes and automate and streamline the work that they're doing?
Right. I mean, isn't it not so true that there's so much marketing genius just caught in the grind of the gears? Right. So much sort of potential energy just being burned through in Excel spreadsheets and what have you. And I think if we were going to talk about sort of what are best practices, I would sort of suggest maybe maybe a threefold approach. And this might feel a little bit unnatural, but it sort of leads to a point where you are unlocking efficiency. We'd suggest that you first look at sort of the full intake. And marketers can certainly appreciate that. So often we're looked at just like a service bureau within the organization versus a strategic contributor. One of the ways to get from service bureau to strategic contributor is to kind of manage the intake of all the work that the marketing department's being asked to do. So frequently people don't have an appreciation for that full spectrum of what we're being asked to do because no one's auditing it, right? Not centrally. So what we've seen, the most successful organizations actually create an ability to create a queue of the work intake or the requests for marketing work. And then ultimately, once you have an ability to look at that work in a centralized way, then ask yourself, what can be templatized? What can be organized in a way centralized and standardized? And there are products like Adobe Workfront that are truly excellent at this, that give you sort of the framework by which you can start to apply templates. And then once you realize that so much work can be, so much friction can be taken out of the system by kind of organizing and templatizing, then you really can then go make a case based on the efficiency for being able to grow what your organization's capable of. And oftentimes that growth involves much more kind of providing strategic insight, even outside of marketing, maybe into product development, into broader go-to-market exercises. I mean, a perfect example is Lumen. We might have known them historically as CenturyLink, but that marketing department did exactly this. And then by sort of centralizing and organizing, they were able to truly transform themselves from that kind of service bureau, like everybody's working hard, too hard, to a place where they had that efficiency, and that allowed them to not only be more productive, but also expand their role within the organization.
That was fantastic information and advice. Really appreciate it. We do now need to move to audience Q&A. I want to give a chance for the audience to ask some questions, and I know we've received quite a bit of good ones here. So let's see here. Do you see any differences between how companies in different industries use marketing technology? Which industries tend to be more future looking?
I can take a lead on that, and I'm sure Adam probably has a perspective too. I'd say a couple of things. I think so. The first thing I'd say is data-rich industries and those that have a history of direct communication. So I'm thinking retail, financial services, travel, auto, have historically been big investors. Insurance. I think one of the really interesting areas to look at here is the sort of challenger brands across a variety of industries. So, the D2C in retail, fintech, et cetera, seeing some really interesting moves there. And DTC is a great example of there's really no line to some extent between their commerce and their marketing, where we're sort of saying these things should be brought together. Younger brands that grew up having that direct relationship and a technologically oriented relationship. I tend to think of them as some of the more advanced, but Adam, really interested to hear what you think there.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Appreciate those insights. Like I said, as a consumer of these insights, I kind of hang on every word. Something that I would bring to kind of this conversation is when we look at some of the organizations or industries where truly kind of even what they represent within sort of the pantheon of experiences that we have today, the organizations where that has drastically changed, I find that they are leaning in so heavily. You brought up financial services, and I think about this a lot. Maybe a decade ago, almost all of us could have told you where our branch is, for a personal banking. We probably even knew the names of some of the tellers. But now my branch is right here. I can't tell you the last time that I actually went into a bank. And so when I sit down with some of our kind of industry strategists at Adobe and talk about financial services, there's such a desire not only to manage, as Dave indicated, sort of like in the highly regulated industry, to make sure that they're using data appropriately, effectively, and to its full extent, but also looking at ways that they can kind of connect the dots on that customer experience. How can they leverage other marketing technology to ensure that they are truly presenting kind of a cohesive experience across channels, whether it's within an app, within an app with a website, connecting their advertising in a way where I feel seen and appreciated in a really high trust kind of requirement environment. So financial services, we see them as big adopters. Travel and hospitality, wow, so much interest there because they went through just really the crucible over the last couple of years, and then they went from like famine to absolute feast. So to see the way that they're looking to leverage data to effectively reach customers now, where we're all in that sort of spirit of, man, I'd love to go see some things. How can they effectively present to us opportunities? And then also, how can they ensure that technology is augmenting the experience from booking to kind of boarding to sort of, checking in, all of that? Those are a couple of areas where I see some really interesting and progressive development.
We have a question here about Dave's infinity loop. Question is there an entry point to look at the infinity loop that you showed that's beneficial to manage Martech infrastructure? And a follow-up question, where do you see ad tech falling into the infinity loop?
So I'll say two things really quick. One, I'm thrilled that our clients are branding our graphics for us. Two, Apple might come after us if we call it an infinity loop. I believe that's where their headquarters is. But to answer the actual question that folks have asked, so there sort of isn't, I think part of the reason we liked this as a graphic is there sort of isn't a single starting point. As you noticed when I was talking through it, I started in the bottom left. That's almost more of a process lens. When you think about start to finish of the process of engaging and understanding the customer, you sort of start with that customer understanding, go to loop in our content and our creative, think about what's the right thing at the right time and deliver. The reality is most customers have elements of this loop, and many of the elements, they may not have it particularly well knit together. And so where to start, to be very honest, it's a little bit of a weaselly answer, but it sort of depends on where you're starting from. But I think the most important thing is to start to think about this and knitting it together and thinking of it as that never ending, it is a constant feedback loop that turns back to itself. Before I bounce to Adam, the second part of the question there in terms of ad tech, as I mentioned, we sort of deliberately separated ad tech from Martech in our definition. I think the obvious area where we see overlap, though. I mean, all of these elements occur in advertising too, right? They're just a different set of technologies that sit behind it. And so we would sort of see them aligned. You hear the term Madtech, which is marketing and ad tech coming together. We hear about it more than we see it, to be honest. But Adam, I know you guys have technologies that cover sort of all of the above, right? Both a lot of across this loop as well as in the advertising world. Do you want to share anything on perspective there?
Yeah, happy to. A lot of times we end up, because of just the different way people buy and sort of the technologies that they've leveraged, we tend to kind of think of those two things as siloed. But the interesting thing to always remember is that the customer doesn't. Right. If you think about if you think about the job of Martech to kind of feed people into that funnel starting with acquisition, then we're into engagement, maybe retention, loyalty. Different people kind of have different labels for it, but ultimately, the way that a customer will engage with your promotional messaging or experiences for them is the beginning, or it's like a progressive step in their experience with your brand. So certainly we like to ask ourselves and ask our customers to think about, even if those systems have some distinct differences, financially, technologically, and otherwise, to think about it in the context of the continuity of experience. And we find that, Dave, the way you're encouraging us to think about like the universal data and profile, that's so relevant in the context of advertising, because now in a programmatic environment, nobody wants to waste ad spend. Everybody wants to see efficiency there. And the number one way to do that is to look at the data that you know and leverage and ensure that your ad buying and is kind of informed by what you know about your customers, and then ultimately that your ad performance is helping inform what you know about your customers, so that you have that hydration and consumption relationship in that data loop. So we definitely know that there are threads, even if there are distinct differences, there are threads that bind them together.
100%.
Wow. Such great information, guys. We have time for one more question before we wrap up. And the question is, regarding the human technology interactions, how can vendors address the challenges that their clients are facing? For example, learning and implementing the constant stream of tech that remakes and upgrades.
Adam, do you want to take a start? Since it's addressed at vendors, do you want to take a start and I can jump in second?
For sure. You know, it's interesting, when I process that question, my brain wants to understand it two ways. That I want to understand it as a consumer and as a focus group of one. You know, even with, like, I have children now that are kind of growing from childhood to adulthood and sort of looking at the way that they leverage technology. So different than me, so different than my parents, the way that technology just fully sort of connects their world. And the lines are so blurred between like the actual marketing, product usage, brand relationships. So it's interesting when I look at my career and I think of how dynamic and how much has changed even the last 10 years to keep up with those customer expectations. It can be certainly it's a challenge, but it's an enormous opportunity. I got so caught up in that thought that I've sort of, lost my bearings on how that I would respond to that as a vendor. Dave, maybe jump in and say,
yeah,
if
sure.
I think of something, I'll cap
no worries. Yeah. So I guess, one of the things I would say, Kelsey, is sort of, a big theme of the research I've been writing about recently is sort of this move that marketers need to make from a 30-second world to an 8-second world. Mm-hmm. And although the 30-second world is sort of the advertising construct, the old sort of 30-second commercial, and the 8-second world I think of as that's the attention span of a Gen Zer. I watch my kids on TikTok. If they give you 8 seconds on a video, you're doing really, really well. But everything that goes into that thinking, so it's not just advertising, it's everything, right? It's it's earning the right to customer attention. And that requires a change in everything. It's understanding what's in the zeitgeist right now that we should be thinking about. You can't jump on a meme 2 days after it blew up. You're out of date, kind of thing. You need to be right in the conversation, but that requires changes in processes too, right? So recognizing it, being willing to produce something that may be subpar from a traditional production, but you get it out really quickly in order to be in the conversation. It requires a change in approvals processes. So all of those elements, but it also applies to technology. We need technologies that that allow the marketer to be more agile. So if I had one piece of advice for vendors, I think it's helping them. Not every client is ready for this transition from 30-second to 8-second, but for those that are, it's helping them sort of holding their hand and being the sort of Sherpa to guide them through that process. It's a massive change management initiative as much as it is anything else. And I think there's a lot of desire, but a lot of trepidation. And often that's where vendors and partners can support those clients that are ready to make the move.
Yeah, Dave,
That's great. Please go ahead. Yes.
That just caused me to think of something that we've been talking about at Adobe for a while. Years ago, we started to talk about this concept of last millisecond marketing because some research showed that you're right, eight seconds, you are really doing well. The human brain is already starting to sense something may be wrong within kind of 300 milliseconds. If something isn't happening, we know that as marketers, we need to be at the ready. And I would say that as vendors, we need to accept the responsibility in order to enable you to exist in a last millisecond marketing world where, and as you're thinking about vendors to whose support and products to enlist and bring into your Martech environment and stack, it's a high bar, but I think we need to set that bar not only for ourselves as vendors, but as marketers. Is this going to allow me to get closer to that real-time realization, my ability to affect an experience in real time, to personalize, to customize, or is it going to add something that's actually going to distract or kind of elongate that opportunity? We live in a world now where we don't get mulligans, right? We don't have the luxury of time. We have to be in that position. And the advice that we've gotten today about the unified or universal customer profile and ensuring that we have technology that allows us to leverage that across the breadth of those customer touch points, be they on glass or in person. I mean, that is the bar. And I think we're all working to it. You know, it's certainly aspirational in a lot of contexts, but there's some really interesting technology that exists right now to help us on our journey, start where we stand towards getting to that place where we are last millisecond marketers.
Well, I think we could keep talking for quite a while. This is a great conversation. Unfortunately, we have to wrap. That's all we have time for today. Thanks again to Dave for joining us, and a very special thanks to Adam and to the team at Adobe. Our marketing production crew behind the scenes also deserves a huge thank you for making this webinar possible. As promised, we will email you a link to the slides and the full recording of this discussion very soon. Before we wrap up, let me just take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. First off, you can look out for Dave's report on this very topic, available this Thursday, September 22nd. And the B2B Martech report will be available mid-October. You can register for more upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, available everywhere you listen to podcasts. And finally, please check out our newsletters. So thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your workday.